Hi.
Greetings. You know, I've been to South Carolina before as a reporter, and usually it was either for hurricanes or political campaigns. Now, both do involve a lot of wind, but we're hoping today to get some real substance. Thank you, Governor, for joining us here today.
You're welcome.
So you wrote for CNN.com some of the basic tenets of your national and international policy. Since we're at a former Air Force base, I thought it might be nice to start talking about the Navy. Mm-hmm. You say you want to beef it up. Oh, there is a mic.
I think you got to use
Have
this.
we got it turned on? Well, I'll
Hello.
talk really loud.
Here you go, Gene. Just use this.
Okay. Since we're at a former Air Force base, I thought it would be appropriate to talk about the governor's proposal to beef up the Navy. Specifically, what are you talking about? How much is it going to cost? And as a cheap hawk, as you call yourself, how in the world are you going to pay for that?
Well, I think, Gene, what's most important is we've seen our national security posture erode over a period of, I guess, probably the last decade. And look, one of the most important things the federal government has to do, essential part of what the federal government has to do is to provide for the common defense. So right now there's a debate in Washington about sequester or whatever, okay? But that should not get in the way of our being able to rebuild most of the defense systems that we have in this country to provide for greater mobility, because in this world you've got to be able to move, and then you have to be lethal when you get there. In terms of the Navy, we had the goal of the 600-ship Navy. I think we got pretty close. Now we're down to, 250 ships. At minimum, we ought to try to build up to 300. We have about 10 carriers now. My goal would be to get as close as you could to 15. And, you've got to have the ability to project power when you get there.
How do you pay for it?
Well, look, as Budget Committee Chairman, I've written, I don't know as much about budgets as some people. I've only written 16 of them. And so it's all about priorities. It's all about making sure you get the most you can, Gene, out of government that you have. So first of all, what we have to do is bring innovation and new thinking to the way we run the government. When I was Budget Committee Chairman, I spent 10 years of my life to get to a balanced budget, and we created priorities. When I left Washington after being the chief architect of that balanced budget along with Senator Domenici, we actually had a $5 trillion surplus, and we did it on a bipartisan basis. When I came in as governor, we were $8 billion in the hole, which was almost 20% of our general operating budget, and now 4.5 years later, we're running a $2 billion surplus. And it was mentioned I got reelected by 186 out of 88 counties. We're still trying to figure out what happened in the other two. But Gene, the point of it is you modernize, you improve, some things you get rid of. So in Washington, so many of the programs there really should be migrated to places like South Carolina. I mean, our K through 12 education, we shouldn't have the federal government doing that. We need to migrate it. We need to empower the people here. Same is true on Medicaid. And you can save money if you give the states the authority to write a program for the poor. All those things fit together towards having a plan to get us to a balanced budget. But included in that is the priority of national security. You're not going to get this done all at once, but I will also tell you, Gene, the reason why I'm called a cheap hawk is because in 1983, as a brand new member of the Armed Services Committee, I was one of the people that found the hammers, the screwdrivers, and the wrenches that cost tens of thousands of dollars. And there's no excuse for wasting money in the welfare department or in the Pentagon. It all has to be fixed. We have almost 900,000 people, according to one report, who were involved in the procurement process. So no one's really in charge. We've gone from an ability to do research and development and field a program in 5 or 6 years to where it takes 22 years. So fix the building and then do the things you need to do to strengthen our military, whether it's the Air Force, the Army, the Marines, or the Navy.
But why do you talk about the, sorry, I
Go ahead.
keep trying to fix this, Mike, but we're not there yet. You're talking about the Navy, though.
Yeah.
And what about the Army? What about the Air
Right.
Force? All the armed forces are stretched. General Odierno recently said that only about a third of Army brigades would be ready to
engage in combat with Russia.
Well, I read the quotes of the general as he left. It's always interesting of the candor of the people when they're leaving. But what I would tell you is we have about 450,000 in the Army. He'd like to go up to 490. I think if we could be at about 450,000 over time, that's probably the right number. But look, people run for president. I don't know, the folks that are here, did you ever notice when people run for president, they never keep their promises? Well, the reason why they do that is they make promises that they can't keep, or they make promises about things they don't understand. What you need to do on national security is, first of all, you obviously have a commander-in-chief who's a civilian. But that commander-in-chief needs to surround themselves with not only military advisors, but military experts as you wade through what should the highest priorities be. I mean, we need to have an army for the unforeseen conditions that always pop up around the world. That's one thing that Ordiano said. You got to have an Air Force. We're bringing on the F-35. There are concerns about it, but it looks like we're going to move forward with it. I mean, all these things have to be done in sequence, and they all can't be done all at once because we didn't get here overnight, and we won't get out of this overnight. And another area we need to pay a lot of attention to is cybersecurity.
And I want to get there in a minute, but before we leave the armed forces, are we preparing for the war of tomorrow, or by the time these things are appropriated and built and commissioned, will you be prepared for a war that's 10, 20 years out of date?
Well, you always have to think about, first of all, the current threats, and you have to plan for the threats that really exist today, not for the threats that exist tomorrow, and that's always a big challenge for us. And when I first came to South Carolina, somebody said, well, are you going to close down any of our bases? Well, I mean, the answer to that is we can't keep things open just because there's parochial interest, because it takes away from our ability to have the resources that we need to be able to make sure our men and women are in the fighting condition they need to be in. So you have to prepare for the threats that's today, but you have to anticipate the threats for tomorrow. But there's some basic similarities in all this. And by the way, I served on this committee for 18 years. This is not something where you kind of go somewhere and visit for 3 or 4 days and think you're a security expert, okay? Doesn't work that way. You got to understand how that building functions and what it takes. So you need to align the resources to the threats that exist and anticipating tomorrow. For example, cybersecurity. We ought to raise the importance of the cybersecurity threat. I mean, people can come in here and they can basically penetrate anything that we have in this country, and it's ridiculous.
So what do you do about it? Tell me what you do about it.
I'll tell you the thing that most people don't know. After 9/11, I was invited to a meeting with the former Secretaries of Defense by Donald Rumsfeld. I have no idea why I was invited to that meeting, because they were all big, big, big people. And I wasn't even in government anymore. I was out of government. And I went to the meeting and I listened. And what I heard was that there were people who were in caves who had technology advantages that we didn't have. So I suggested at this meeting that I think we should tap the biggest and brightest minds, best and brightest minds in the Silicon Valley to deal with the technology threat. A couple days later, and of course the money laundering threat. So a couple days later they called me. They said, we think this is a great idea. So along with some of my friends from out there, we gathered some of the smartest thinkers on the area of technology. And two of them, at the time, no one ever heard of. And I'm not sure they're household words today. When I met them, they put their inline skates on the top of a Volkswagen, and now they've gone public and they fly a Boeing 707. Their names are Larry Page and Sergey Brin. They created this little company called Google. Well, they went to Washington, and they advised the Pentagon. And for about 3 years, I was able to lead a group of private sector people who were the best in technology, solving some of the most complex problems that the Pentagon was experiencing in the technology area. If you're going to begin to win the war on cybersecurity, you need to gather the best private sector experts on cybersecurity and not punish them for working with the government. Now, what happened to that little group that I had is all of a sudden they started putting a lot of red tape like government does, and most of these people scattered.
So what do you do now? Move us forward from
you
here.
You bring common sense back to government, okay? It's all these rules and regulations and people tripping. Create safe zones where people who have the expertise out here in the world who can deal with this very serious cybersecurity threat to come in and advise the government and not
Government has
penalize.
tried to bring them.
No, look, I was there when we did it, Gene. I was there after 9/11. I was there when it functioned well for a few years, and Congress started meddling in it. So bottom line is create safe harbors and safe zones so that our best and brightest can help. If you talk to private sector, advanced, technologically savvy people in the business world and tell them, we want you to come work with the federal government, you know what they'll tell you? Are you kidding me?
That's right.
So now we need to make it a safe place for them to bring their expertise because they want to serve America. They want to be patriots. And I was part of a group that did that. I mean, I didn't have the technology expertise, but sometimes they need a Sacagawea to lead them through the system.
So let's talk a little bit about encryption, which is one of the hot subjects right now on cyber. Law enforcement says they need to get more access to people's phones, for instance, to get information about what they're doing, and yet Apple, amongst others, says no. Where are you on the issue?
I think it's a balance between, look, I mean, as the governor of Ohio, from time to time, I get people to come to visit me to tell me about security threats in my state. And we're all aware of the lone wolf problem in this country, which, before we're done here, I'd like to talk about ISIS and what I think we can do, not just about the military side, but the idea side of what they try to present. Gene, there's a balance between privacy and I think that in some ways Rand Paul did us a favor when he said you need to get warrants. You need to be able, if there's information they need, the government needs to get it, and if it's a real crisis, then we again have to have a common sense approach to this. But we don't want to willy-nilly just begin to take things from people. So it's like everything else in life. It's a balance between the need to have this information and the need to protect our civil liberties. And so I'm right in between Chris Christie and Rand Paul on that. I mean, the fact is that I think warrants and checks are important on government. If we don't like the government doing a whole bunch of things on one side, we shouldn't automatically trust them to do everything on the other side. But they have to have the information in a timely way. And that's how you can disrupt a lot of these lone wolves and these little networks.
So should they have a key, law enforcement, in order to get into devices when they need to get into it? Should
Look,
there be a
again, I think it gets down to being able to get to a court and present your information, and if it's critical to our national security and the protection of our families, the answer is yes. And if it's a automatic crisis, you know, then you just got to use common sense and move forward with it.
I want to talk about something you just brought up, actually, which is how do we deal with this phenomenon of young people in America and around the world sitting in their basements, consuming social media, and finding radical Islam?
Yeah.
How do we deal with that?
Well, first of all, let's just be clear. You know, over the weekend we heard these unbelievable reports of ISIS raping 12, 13, 14-year-olds. And these stories, you know, I've got two 15-year-old daughters. You read a story like that, the attacks on Western civilization by ISIS are horrific. And for the life of me, I don't understand why we have not worked aggressively with our allies to go where we need to go with boots on the ground and destroy these people, because this is an attack on our very way of life. Now, but Gene asks a very interesting question here. How can two young people from Starkville, Mississippi, try to board a plane to go to Syria to get themselves involved in ISIS? And let me just have you think about this, because I think tomorrow when I'm in Iowa at the State Fair and on the soapbox, they call it there, I think I want to talk about it. I've been talking about it a lot more. What ISIS offers people, they're false lies. They promise family, purpose, the next world. You do these things and you're going to get a great reward, whatever it is. Western civilization, in my opinion, including our culture in the United States, for many years now has preached the idea of freedom, free to do whatever you want. Now, I've got these two kids, right? And I don't let them do everything they want. There are limits and guardrails. There's another thing here in America, and sometimes we're all in pursuit of happiness. I just want to be happy. When you're not pursuing something greater than yourself, when you don't realize it is your job to bring healing and justice to this world, then you begin to find that life is meaningless. Now, as a society, as part of Western civilization, including our friends in Europe, Gene, we've got to realize that a part of the life experience is being bigger than yourself, that you can find happiness, but happiness doesn't come from chasing happiness. It comes from the satisfaction of living a life bigger than yourself, of helping other people. You know, and we talk about president, but I'm also worried about our citizens. Are we our brother's keeper? Do we care about our neighbor? Are we mentoring kids in the schools? Are we using our churches and synagogues to help those that are less fortunate than us? Because when you do it, you find satisfaction and happiness. Because frankly, I believe it's written on our hearts that we have an obligation to be bigger than ourselves. And Gene, to me, the battle's not just on the battlefield, which we can win. The battle also exists in the battle of ideas. First of all, we ought to be broadcasting with all the great religions in the world that if you think killing innocent men, women, children is going to get you to paradise, you're dead wrong. You're dead wrong, you're a savage. But at the same time, we need to make sure that our young people hear about purpose. When they don't hear about purpose and living a real life, what do they wander into drugs many times? They get themselves involved in gangs. I mean,
But you're never going to get all kids
but
to
Gene,
buy into that. You just
well,
aren't.
look,
And tell me about putting limits on a kid's online activities. You've got
I'm
two
not,
kids.
I'm not talking about that. Look, my kids have online activities, but they're not going to go join ISIS. Because my wife and I try to tell them...
I don't think the parents in Mississippi thought their kids were going to
Yeah,
do it
but what
either.
happens is when kids don't feel a connection to something significant, and I think in many ways our culture has said, freedom, that's all we need. You know, Richard Cohen wrote about this in the New York Times on Saturday. I don't want to misquote him, but he talked about the fact that when there are no guardrails, we have confusion. And so we have to work. You know, I talk about 5 values that need to be reimplanted in our country: personal responsibility, resilience, empathy, family, faith. These are the things that unite us as a country and as a society and as a culture. And we need to think about that. Bottom up, not top down, Gene.
And boots on the ground. You mentioned it. What the heck do you mean?
Well, you get a coalition
US
of people.
Coalition?
Yeah,
Okay.
and you know we
U.S. troops involved?
Sure, and we have let our relations with our allies erode. And I'll give you a perfect example. How do you have these people murdered in this attack over there in Paris, and they have a ceremony to mourn the loss of these innocent people, and we don't send anybody? I mean, I don't understand that, okay? So, you know, look, my experience is, Gene, not just in life but in politics, relationships matter. You know why the Congress doesn't function anymore? There's no relationships. Nobody has a relationship to anybody else. The same is true with our allies. So we have to develop deep and lasting friendships with the people who share our values, so we speak with
Who are
one
you talking
voice.
about?
Well, the French, the Germans, the Belgians, the Brits, the Spanish, the Italians. I mean, we're all in this together.
Who are spending less and less, many of them, on defense.
Well, my view on that is that, first of all, they are trying to do some things over in Europe, but I will tell you that their economies, frankly, because they don't practice the kind of that we need to be more robust in, which is free markets, reasonable regulations, not punishing people when they're successful. Their economies are lagging. And frankly, our economy is lagging because national security is also dependent on a strong economy. But here's what I'm suggesting. There are ways they can do things on the cheap with technology or whatever, but we have to be on the same team. The radicals speak with one voice, and we speak with disunity, and it has to stop. We could fix it.
What's the end game? We put troops in,
Oh, you just begin to destroy ISIS, you roll them back, you destroy the caliphate.
and then what happens?
Well, then you're going to
Someone
have...
else steps into the void?
Well,
Unless you get involved in nation building?
Well, I don't want to be doing nation building. That's not what I'm talking about. What I am...
Well, then how do you make sure history doesn't repeat itself?
Well, part of it is what I was talking about, but people who seem to be attracted to these radical organizations. Okay, that's number one. Number two, we have to be in a position of where we make it clear to the world that that kind of activity is not acceptable by all the great religions of the world. Number three, I mean, you know, the fact is we support the Israelis. We tell the Saudis, who for too long we walk around with their princes and we pay them homage, the time has come to tell the Saudis to stop supporting the madrasas in their country where they are teaching people to preach radical Islam. We got to talk straight to them, okay? Now, Gene, I don't think we talk straight to them with, you know, 5 or 6 television cameras. You know, diplomacy sometimes can be very quiet. You tell your friends what you think, just like your family. You don't run around yelling about criticizing your family. You do it behind closed doors. And so I think it's a whole series of things. And realizing who our friends are and supporting our friends. I mean, the Saudis are basically have shared interests. The Jordanians, shared interests. The Egyptians, we don't like everything they do. But you know what? We have some shared interests with them. That's what you have to do. Be clear. Don't put a red line and then say, okay, well, the red line's been violated and I'm not going to pay attention to it. I mean, that's another mistake.
I want to get back to boots on the ground.
Yeah.
And whether by doing that you address the fundamental underlying problem. Some people would say it's the Sunni-Shia divide. Is that
No,
something
I think it's radical Islam. It is a philosophy.
And why is it appealing? Because of the Sunni-Shia divide.
But I think part of it is that, but part of it is because people do look to be part of something bigger than themselves. And so it is not just a war on the battlefield, it's a war of ideas. Let me say to you, can you imagine that we have a movement now in the world that says that if you rape a 12-year-old girl, you're getting closer to Allah? I mean, where are
they're actually using it as a recruiting tool, according to
for men,
newspaper
right?
reports.
And then they try and recruit the girls by lying to them about what it's going to be like over there. So the world needs to speak in one voice clearly and condemn this, and have the military capability to confront it where it exists.
So
it's
how
just
do you get
that
the
simple.
world to speak with one voice?
You start building relationships with the leaders. I mean, look, the people in Europe are beginning to understand the consequences of ignoring this kind of radicalism. That's why they're beginning to deal with who's coming into their country. They're beginning to deal with what happens in the mosques, because the reality of putting our heads in the sand. And that's the problem here with us allowing, look, the administration says they're going to train the Iraqis. I was with an administration official. I said, what are you going to do about ISIS? Well, we're training the Iraqis. I said, well, now 100 years after you failed in training them, then what are we going to do? The time has come to act. We should have been supporting the rebels in Syria. We should be working now to place boots on the ground to destroy this caliphate.
Despite the fact that many Americans do not want to see American troops on the ground.
I'm not so sure about that. I think Americans understand what this threat is. And I think when presented appropriately, as long as we're not going to be over there in some nation-building capacity, go do our job where our interests are threatened, go take care of the problem and come home. Don't spend your time trying to convert somebody to our way of life. So the way I would do it in a nutshell, and look, I spent 18 years having to vote on the war in Lebanon, what we do in the first Gulf War. I mean, I spent time thinking and voting on these things. And what we need to do is determine our direct national interests. And when we find them, we need to protect them. That's why we need to be lethal and mobile. Secondly, as it relates to people who share our values, explain to me why we are not giving the equipment that the Ukrainians are asking for to fight the Russians in Ukraine. I don't know if you know the history of Ukraine.
Well, some people say that it would be a bad idea to do that because that would provoke Putin.
Well,
look, many an expert says.
Yeah. Many an expert. You know why God created astrologers? To make economists look accurate. Think about that one, right? But no, I understand. They think it would be, look, we didn't create the problem in the Ukraine. And the Ukraine has had a history of where people have tried to destroy their language. They starved 1 million of them. These are people who share our values. Frankly, they want to move closer and closer to the West, which is why Putin sent his stormtroopers in there. But look, he asked for it. And they should have the defensive weapons that they need to be able to protect themselves. And I tell you what, one thing the president's done here that makes a lot of sense is when he's pre-positioning equipment in Europe now, and we're getting our allies together to say, no way, Putin. Now I think the sanctions should be tougher on Putin, but at the minimum, we ought to supply them with the weapons that they are asking for so they can defend themselves. And, as I said earlier, I think we should have early on been supporting the rebels in Syria. And by the way, and now everybody's going to tell you this, but, I give a lot of credit to Chuck Schumer, okay? He is perhaps going to be the Democratic leader in the Senate, and his opposition to this Iranian deal, I believe, has taken great courage. So you know what? He's getting a lot of bad stuff. Send Senator Schumer an email. If you are against this deal, you send him an email or send him a short note thanking him for his position. And I saw today where Senator Flake came out of it. Maybe this thing isn't going to happen yet. Let's say our prayers and hope not.
Interestingly, you in the past have said if you were to become president, you would not day one rip up an accord with the Iranians if indeed it goes into force.
Yeah, well, I don't know what that means, rip up an accord. Okay, what we ought to do is, first of all, defeat this thing. And secondly, if it does go, and I don't like to get into what ifs, but what I would tell you is right now, I mean, there's so many things that should be done. Like all the parties to the talks should agree that if there is any violation of this accord, we slap back the sanctions and we increase them. But they're not going to do that. Secondly, I think we should monitor every bit of this, and if the Iranians violate it, then the accord has no impact on us. You wouldn't abide by an accord if they're cheating. And so let's just take this thing step by step, and just don't. I've learned long enough to not build my own red lines. Okay, you're going to say something, you mean it. Now they violate this, or if the security interests of the United States or our friends, particularly Israel, is in jeopardy, then the accord would mean nothing for me, because I don't think it'll mean anything for the Iranians. But you know what I really worry about is not just what they're doing here, but I worry about the proliferation of this nuclear material. We are now reading that ISIS may have some sort of a chemical weapon, maybe mustard gas.
And maybe using it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, think about this. If they got that material, they in all likelihood got it from Syria. And now they are using this apparently against the Kurds, okay? So here you have a case where ISIS does not hesitate to use chemical weapons to destroy people. Could you imagine if they ever got their hands on this nuclear material? They wouldn't hesitate to use it. And that's one of the great dangers of the Iranian, this Iranian, whatever you want to call it. I wouldn't even call it a deal. I don't know what it is. It's like...
Well, so if you don't support the deal,
yeah.
How would you keep Iran from developing a nuclear weapon? What do you do?
Look, they may ultimately get it, but I would make it so hard for them, and I would slap
How?
on sanctions. Oh, I'd have sanctions.
Sanctions are in place. They haven't worked.
Well, yeah, they're working. The economy is a shambles.
But they're still working on a nuclear program.
But look, you put this agreement in, and what you're going to do now is you're going to rehabilitate their economy by lifting the sanctions. And in fact, if America imposes its own sanctions, there's a secondary impact of that. And here's what it is. If we have sanctions on and a French oil company wants to do business with the Iranians, well, they're not going to do business in the United States of America. We're either going to stand for something here or we're not. And I'm for standing for something.
But I just want to pursue this one more step. We have partners in the Iranian negotiations. Some of them are people we would like to see impose stiffer sanctions on Iran if the deal goes south. They've invested time and money in this agreement as well.
Yeah.
What would their incentive be to join us in a sanctions regime? Because they support the accord.
Gene, the answer to that is real simple. I don't mean it's a good question, but the answer is our children's future. I mean, what are we going to live in a world where everybody has a nuclear weapon? We're going to live in a world where we're going to have a country that won't even, that constantly says they're going to destroy one of our most important allies. I mean, we're all in this together. We're back now to a discussion about Western civilization and about whether it's going to be robust to provide human rights and to provide economic progress and rescue people from poverty, or whether we're going to turn this over to people who are going to have leverage over us because they have weapons of mass destruction. I mean, this gets to be about, it's like when Margaret Thatcher said to one of our American presidents, "Don't go wobbly on me." Okay? And all I know is that Ronald Reagan, I don't know how many of you remember when he went to Reykjavik, and he wanted to keep the Strategic Defense Initiative, and Gorbachev wanted to trade it for the elimination of all nuclear weapons, and I will never forget, Reagan said, "Thank you, but no thank you." He got back in the car, and the economic might of the United States and our technological capability destroyed the Soviet Union. And it was a great moment in human history. So,
We want your questions. Please hand in your cards. Do make them about national security, not domestic policy.
but make them easy, okay?
Well-
Make them
well,
easy.
we do have
come
one
on,
here.
I'm a visitor, you know?
We do have one here, and I don't think it's easy for you. With al-Qaeda attacking us from the front, and China, Russia, and North Korea flanking us, how are you going to stand up to all of these leaders and make the U.S. first in the world once again? No name on this
Yeah,
question.
well, that's
but-
okay. Well, one thing at a time. I mean, America,
So what's your priority?
America can chew gum and walk at the same time. China doesn't own the South China Sea. Back in the old days when they threatened Taiwan, we sent a carrier battle group through there, I'm told. I would send a carrier battle group through the South China Sea to make it clear to the Chinese that you don't own this. And there'd be so many countries in Asia, by the way, who would be supporting us. It's part of the reason why I support the Pacific Trade Agreement. But we need to talk about trade because it's also an economic weapon and can hurt us. We need to spend a little time on that. In a nutshell, I'm for free trade agreements, but when they're going to dump their products in our country and violate these agreements, we need to stop it immediately and not debate it for 2 years before we decide what to do. But trade is important to those countries. Trade is an element of foreign policy where we can integrate. Russia, I mean, I've told you what I think about Russia, the Ukraine. He steps one foot into any more of this Western territory, and NATO has an agreement that attack on one is attack on everyone. I don't think he'll do it if he sees how strong we are. So that's Russia, that's China. I mean, all these things done over time. What other one was on there?
They mentioned al-Qaeda. You've talked a little bit
Okay,
about ISIS and,
Al-Qaeda. Well, I mean,
boots
look,
on the ground,
it's-
but it isn't just ISIS. It is al-Qaeda. It's Boko
Yeah,
Haram.
I agree
It's
with you.
al-Shabaab. It's al-Qaeda
That's
in the
right.
Arabian
Yeah.
Peninsula.
Well,
they're-
I mean, and where these things are, look, first of all, our human intelligence needs to be improved. We basically eroded and that's one of the things I think Mike Rogers would say, although he's not here to say it. We need better human intelligence, and when we have people here who are from other countries and have families, it's probably the best way to integrate and find out. There is no substitute for intelligence and our ability to know what's happening on the ground. Secondly, you've got to have a strong military, and when you see these threats, it's, for example, with drones. I support the drones attacks. I'd rather the targeting be done in the Pentagon than in the CIA because the Pentagon has the capability to do it, and the CIA isn't great at that. So you have to have a strong military, a strong economy. You've got to mean what you say and say what you mean. And you got to, I mean, you put your allies together and grow our economy, we're going to be fine. We're going to be fine. But this battle against this radicalism is probably going to be something we face for the rest of our lives. And we need to destroy it, not only militarily, but intellectually. And we need to charge our people up again to understand that they have a purpose on this earth. And if we do all that, we're going to be strong and we're going to be fine. And we're not going to panic and say, oh my goodness, what are we going to do? We will be fine. It's common sense. It's not easy, but it's actually fairly simple.
So how do you fight it, though? You talked about ISIS. How do you fight it? Common sense has been
First of all, in Saudi Arabia, the Saudis are winning that war in Yemen right now. A lot of good news there. In Syria, I think it's just a matter of time until Assad leaves. I think that we cannot have any sort of mixed feelings towards our ally Israel. Israel gives up territory and they invite more attacks. I mean, we have to stand with our friends. Okay?
Let me ask again for questions from the audience here. Come on, folks. This is, here we have some more. Oh, good. Some of these are issues we've covered already. So, okay, I can't read that one. Okay, here's one. Should
it bad?
Turkey, no, I just couldn't make out the
Turkey.
handwriting. Should Turkey remain in NATO? Are they doing enough on ISIS? That's
Well,
for
first of all,
Mark.
I think Turkey should remain in NATO. And secondly, I think, again, this is one of those things that you'd rather say quietly to, see, everything doesn't have to be on Snapchat, okay? You can do some things quietly. But I think the Europeans made a big mistake when they did not invite Turkey into the EU. I think we could have more fully integrated the Turks, who are Western-oriented, into our world. And the EU rejected it for maybe, I don't even know all the reasons. But I think it was a terrible mistake. Secondly, Turkey has had a long history of separating religion from their government. That was a guy by the name of Ataturk, the new leader of Turkey. He's not a new leader anymore. Erdogan he's kind of changed that, Gene. And so he suffered a defeat in the last election where he was grabbing for power that fortunately he didn't get, but now I hear they're going to call another election. But where are we today? Well, we've reached agreement to use one of their air bases to carry out missions in Syria to protect the people that we've trained. The Turks have agreed to allow us to do it. They claim that they want to be involved in supporting the rebels to destroy ISIS. But what we're finding is they're engaging in a war, some wonder or suspect, against the Kurds. And so it's very complicated. Our policy is equally complicated. Okay, well, we're not going to do something to push out Assad, but we aren't going to do anything with the Kurds. And this is not the way you run foreign policy. There isn't clarity to it. So we have to keep working with the Turks. There's no question about it. And we have to realize that the Kurds over in Iraq in particular have been very strong for us. So it's a kind of a delicate balance to walk, but we have to know who our friends are. And sometimes our friends squabble, and at that point in time, say some things quietly. But I think that fortunately, our ability to use air bases in Turkey was a breakthrough. But we just cannot allow them to go to war against the Turks, although there are against the Kurds. There are Kurds, though, that have been labeled as terrorist groups by both us and the Turks, and I'm probably telling you more than what you want to know, but this is, it shows you how complicated things are. But the bottom line is we need to pull Turkey closer to us, to the West, and not let them move towards the East.
Elaine asks a question. She says the Middle East is worse than Vietnam or the former USSR. The radicals have nothing to lose. Our troops are war-weary. Do you think we need to reinstate the draft?
No, I'm not really for doing that, and I don't want to be policeman of the world, and I don't think we have to be. We have been able to sell equipment or deliver foreign aid to our allies. We've reinstated foreign aid to Egypt, which fundamentally has been an ally of ours. And look, we don't like everything all these countries do, but you know, we don't like everything that people in our own families do. We learn how to get along when we have, by and large, great mutual interests. In addition to that, of course, when it comes to the Israelis, look, if I'm a president of the United States and a prime minister comes to the United States, I don't care if his election's the next day, I'm going to have a cup of coffee with him, okay? And I've said what I have to say about the Saudis. They are fundamentally in agreement with us on many things. But I've got to tell you, I'm so happy that the United States of America is involved in fracking so that we can become energy independent, which is another very big issue for us. And by the way, the low price of energy is a giant, giant plus for us. You know, it is an ability. You all worry about, can we get manufacturing back on shore? You keep lowering the price of energy and the price of transportation with wages going up in other parts of the world, you're darn tootin' we can get some more manufacturing back in the United States. And those are all security issues, by the way. They're all security issues. In terms of the Jordanians, they're under tremendous attack. They basically are in league with us, as most of the Gulf states are. And Iran's the big menace. And you know, Gene, when they talked about this agreement, that all those folks over there who are our allies didn't like it, and then we went over and probably pounded them a little bit and made a lot of promises to them, and they went the other way. But I think we know what they think.
Getting back to that draft question, you just mentioned you don't want the U.S. to be the policeman of the world, but you've talked about putting boots in the ground against ISIS. You've talked about sending a carrier group to the South China Sea. You've talked about sending arms to Ukraine. All of that is muscular stuff. What role does diplomacy play, not just with our allies,
with
but
anybody?
With our enemies?
Sure.
Ronald Reagan sat down with the Soviets.
Well, you've got to talk to people. I mean, there's some people that, you know, I have an old philosophy. I don't have to agree with you, but if you're not an unethical person, then I'm going to sit and talk to you. Now, there are some regimes out there that are unethical, and I think we have to be careful exactly when and how we do speak to them.
And you're talking about who there? Iran?
Well, let's start with North Korea, okay? I mean,
who hasn't come up yet?
but let me tell you, I think it should be a three-legged stool. I think we need to have the military might. I think we need to have the diplomatic action. And we need to have a conservative State Department that understands what we're all about. Thirdly, I think we need to include our business leaders in discussions about what happens in the world. I talked to a man who runs a major oil company in this country. He probably knows more about Vladimir Putin than people in the State Department. You got to understand they have their interests, but we don't want to cut them out. I'd have an alignment of military, diplomatic, and business, and to look at different parts of the world and what's really happening on the ground. You know, a lot of the business people have people on the ground that can tell us exactly what's happening there.
You know who else has a lot of business people on the ground? China.
Yeah, they do.
They have people all throughout Africa, through South America. They are really extending their business relationships around the world.
Yeah, I don't know that
some believe it's part of a grand strategy.
Sure it is.
How do you cope with that?
Well, first of all, we better get our budget balanced over a period of time here and develop economic strength, because what the Chinese are doing, they've created this infrastructure bank. And I know, Gene, you probably read the articles about what they're doing in Ecuador, where they basically are stripping Ecuador of all the basic minerals that they have for 100 years. So I think, first of all...
And building infrastructure.
Yeah, and what I would say is that, you know, it's concerning when they own a big chunk of the United States of America. I don't like them buying, you know, we've got to balance our budgets and become strong economically. And I don't think we need to look at China as an enemy, but we have to look at them without rose-colored glasses on.
So
and here's what I know about the Chinese. It's not what you say, it's what you do. And I would put us in a forceful position where they know where we are. But, you know, if countries want to bring them in, we pleaded for countries not to participate, but there are other things we can do.
Have we offered them an alternative? What should we be offering them?
Well, look, I don't want to get into a long infrastructure bank question, because that would take another hour. But here's what I would tell you. I was always a reformer for foreign aid. Foreign aid, sometimes I have labeled it corporate welfare. Businesses go out and they build these dam projects, okay, and the people just hate what's being done. Foreign aid can be a very vital tool in terms of projecting the kind face of America, because we're the kindest country in the history of the world. So let me tell you a little story. In 1999 or around there, I met Bono, the rock star. And I was able to work with Bono for debt forgiveness in Africa. George Bush then worked with Bono to do a number of things in Africa, simple things, mosquito nets, clean water. You see, when America can project its kind face, when people there who are radicals may be attacking the United States, there are going to be people in those villages who will stand up and say, but they vaccinated my son or daughter, or they saved our village's existence. See, foreign aid can really matter, but to just sprinkle it out there and not make sure it gets to do the things we want is a mistake. So I think it's a whole series of things that we can do. These trade agreements that we're engaging in can be very helpful as long as we enforce them and we're not snookered by them.
But foreign aid does have a part to play.
Oh, it does. Absolutely, it does.
Dan.
But
has
I'd reform the whole darn system, because right now, it's like the Agency for International Development. I'm told that the Agency for International Development, they take countries from developing to developed, and I'm told that no one has ever graduated from developing to developed, okay? I actually tried to kill that thing back when I was in Congress,
Reminder, folks, we're almost out of time for questions, so please try and get them into us if you can. Dan here asks one. He says the Army is set to cut 40,000 troops. Can we address the threats around the world that face us?
No, I don't think we should do this drawdown. I mean, the retiring general, Chief of Staff of the Army, says 490. I mean, if we were able to be at 450 around about, I mean, and look, let me tell you how it's worked for me. You need to have people who understand thoroughly the system, who have not been captured or co-opted by the system, who can tell you the straight stuff. So I used to have people when I was in Congress, and I have people today that I talk to. For example, a former top official at the CIA told me, we don't have the targeting capability that the Army has, or that the Pentagon, the military has. Targeting of drone attacks ought to be done by the military, not by the CIA. That man had instant credibility with me. Because you have to pick the people that can cut through it, who are not practicing parochialism, who are just as smart as a whip, who can look for the long-term security interests of the United States and to advise you on weapon systems, which ones work. There's a big dust-up now on the F-35. Can it maneuver? Can it dogfight? And the Marines say, we love the thing. It'd be nice to kind of get to the bottom of it. And so, make a long story short, you need good advisors. But you have to have a commander-in-chief that has a good gut and good instincts.
Angela has a question here, right in your wheelhouse. How would you protect the U.S. economy from the Chinese, i.e. currency wars, U.S. debt they hold, trade imbalances, intellectual property theft?
Well, I mean, the idea that we would let them launch cyber attacks on us and look the other way, to me, is just preposterous. I mean, frankly, one of the things you can do is to elevate...
We can't always attribute
No,
where they're
but I
coming
think we
from.
should elevate probably the cyber importance to maybe, to a higher command, maybe its own, combatant command. I don't want to...
Presumably, the U.S. is very
about.
active in cyberspace as well.
Yeah, but unfortunately, most of the expertise is in the private sector, which we seem not to want to listen to.
Well, not according to Edward Snowden.
Oh, by the way, he released information that either has or could lead to the death of people. The man is a traitor, and any dispute about that, I mean, it's just totally unbelievable. So. Look, Gene, I mean, in terms, again, we keep going back to cyber and their invasion, or intellectual property, for far too often we've looked the other way.
Well, for far too often...
It's up to a president to say we're not going to do that. Look...
Well, isn't it also up to private industry?
Well, we need them to help us, to show us what we do to put up... And it's not just defense, it's also offense. It's the ability to project, because we're not going to sit here. We need to project our power.
However,
in cyber and in space.
For years, the U.S. government has been warning the private sector, you have to do more to protect your intellectual property, and they didn't take it seriously.
Well, I don't, look, when the government's warning business, are you kidding me?
Well, when the business is seeing their ideas going out the door?
Yeah, but what I'm suggesting to you, look, they just said that, who was it? Was it John Kerry that said his own account may have been hacked? I mean, don't they realize that you've got to get the best minds? And look, I'm repeating myself.
Well, I think they're trying, but they're paying government salaries, so
no, you're not going to do it through the government folks. They can be partners. But I want to go back to my experience post 9/11. The best people from the Silicon Valley came in with technological solutions that helped. We used to go down there, and Secretary Rumsfeld would thank people personally for the things that were contributed to some of the most serious problems. And let me tell you another thing. We had those IED explosions. I was told the other day that it takes now as long as 22 years to field a system. No one's in charge. We need to streamline the whole bureaucracy and return them to the services. But here's the interesting thing. They produce vehicles to protect our soldiers in the snap of a finger. because they went to common sense and they cut through all the nonsense and all the bureaucracy, the red tape and the delay, and they developed something to protect our soldiers. That's the mindset we have to have. Now, let me just suggest to you as governor of Ohio, you don't think that I got from an $8 billion hole to a $2 billion surplus with the creation of 350,000 jobs without being able to make decisions? I wasn't the chairman of the House Budget Committee to lead us to the first balanced budget since man walked on the moon by playing namby-pamby. We get this done by knowing where we want to go and executing it. So if the Chinese are going to start to rip off our intellectual property, we have to have people that can go there, or even the president himself, and say, this will not be tolerated. This is not difficult to think about. And I'm the one that tells you that we have to be careful about what we say and the promises, but America can't get run over any longer, particularly in the area of trade or the whole business of cyber. So,
I want to get this one last question in because I find this fascinating. From Mark, what in order are the biggest threats? Hackers, EMP, or space warfare?
well, the hackers are obviously right now front and center, and the ability to deal with our grid is a very, very serious problem that we're going to have to deal with. And space is something that America's got to be, we have to be engaged in all the tools that we need to provide for the national defense. So it's not like one or the other. They're all important, but front and center right now seems to be cyber. So you're going to let me say a few things?
I am going to let you say a few things.
Okay, so folks,
right
thanks for coming, and thanks for people who have been here with the media covering. By the way, I had a great morning. I was endorsed for President of the United States by the governor of Alabama, which was really a wonderful thing. And I'm virtually tied for second place in New Hampshire, and I'm the little engine that can, because most of you didn't know anything about me. And I want to thank Donald Trump for being in that debate, because 24 million people got to watch it, and that was a really good thing. But here's what I really want to tell you. I want you to think about what I said earlier about meaning in life. Change one life, you save the world. Whether it's your grandchildren, your children, your great-grandchildren, or the neighbor that's down the street. At the end of the day, in my opinion, and I'm not here to be a preacher, okay? But at the end of the day, people are going to wonder about what we contributed in our life. And what I'm worried about in our country is that government, in some respects, have crowded out people's duties. Like somebody else can do it, or the government will do it. America works best from the bottom up. We need to reignite the flame of the ability to change the world in which we live. For me, as a political leader, it's my job not to worry about public opinion polls. It's my job to worry about making things better. And I meet with a lot of these politicians, young people today, and I say, don't care about the polls, care about being proud of what you did when you held public office. We do need to balance our federal budget. It will lead to greater economic growth. And you know what? Economic growth and job creation is our greatest moral purpose, because when people have jobs, families are stronger, communities are stronger, our country is stronger. I think we have to also remember that economic growth is not an end unto itself, that economic growth allows us to help a lot of people who have been forgotten or live in the shadows, the mentally ill or the drug addicted, the working poor. We have an obligation for them, because when America's not united, we're not as strong as when we are united. And I think back, because I actually worked with Ronald Reagan. I first met him in 1976. And he lifted our country and unified our country. Our political system is dysfunctional, Gene, and I think a lot of people around the world look at us and say, can they fix anything? Can they solve anything? Does America have the will anymore to get things done? That's why our Congress has to work. And I don't care how strongly you feel about an issue, show a little respect to the person next to you that may not share your view. Because if you search and work long enough and hard enough, you will find common purpose. That's the strength of our country. Not an America that fights with one another, but America that practices being an American before a Republican or a Democrat or a conservative or a liberal. That's what we need. Finally, we need economic strength. We need to make sure that our military is strong for this reason. Look at what's happening today. You know, I've been around long enough to know when they loved us and when they didn't. They hated us and they booed us. They wanted, you know what, at the end of the day? The world wants us. The world needs us. Reagan talked about the shining city on a hill. You know, you don't hide a light under a basket. The world needs America. And you need to understand something about me. I know I'm involved in a political campaign, but that's not as important to me about the movement to make these things right, to get these things right again in our country. So you have an exciting opportunity in South Carolina. You know, you're going to have Iowa, and then you're going to have New Hampshire, and then you're going to come right here. And I think it's a great system. I really do. I'm going to go to Iowa tomorrow and eat something on a stick and go to the fair.
What's it going to be?
Pork chop.
Pork chop.
And I'm going to enjoy it. And then you go to the great screen in New Hampshire where they, just like South Carolina, they look you in the eye, they touch you, they feel you, they try to figure out what you're made of. Issues are not as important. Issues are a way for people to project who they are. Take your job seriously, which I know you do. And we're going to have a better day tomorrow. The sun's going to come up in America. We face tougher times, and we'll win. So thank you all for being here, and God bless you.
Thank you, Governor.